You're watching 41 Action News.
Right now, we've seen 99 lives lost to homicide in Kansas City just in 2020. And we're on pace to set a record for the most homicides ever in Kansas City in just 1 year.
This morning, we're joined live with Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas. Good morning, Mayor. Thank you for joining us again.
Good morning.
So, Kansas City, just one homicide away from a very grim milestone, reaching 100 for the year. In years past, we have not hit that mark until much later down the road. What do we do here? What are you going to do when we hit that mark? And what are you already doing?
Well, a few steps that we've recognized are essential for us are to first make sure that regardless of party, background, what our role in this justice system is to frankly say the buck stops with us. I think it stops with me. I met yesterday with prosecutors from Kansas City North and the police department, a number of others, to say what can we do better on an intervention side. But we also recognize we need to do more crime prevention. That is your conflict resolution. That is actually trying to get down and break up gang activity, et cetera. And then another part of what I think we need to do is to make sure that there's an increase in trust between our communities and the police. A big part of making us safer is getting some of our violent offenders off the streets, and a lot of that's going to require the community to talk. If we have broken relationships between certain parts of our community and our police department, then we'll never get to where we need to be in solving our crimes.
And Mayor, you just touched on it, but you're a member of the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners. You were actually just tweeting a few minutes ago about police board meeting more often. And there have been calls for our police chief to resign. How are we working to just improve relations when it comes to police and the community?
I think we need to recognize where our shortcomings are. I bet for decades we've been meeting once a month in the Board of Police Commissioners, and that has built up in some level of tradition. But frankly, I think as we're seeing in a lot of areas in America right now, sometimes those traditions need to change. Sometimes they need to be updated. I just said online that your police commissioners should meet more often than your neighborhood HOA board. Right? In Kansas City, we have a planning commission that meets twice a month. We have a liquor review board that meets frequently, but we have a police board that in some ways you could say barely does. We've had a very significant conversation on policing in America over the last month, and we've had probably up to 25 homicides or so. And, we're sitting in a position where we're just, meeting once a month to talk about it. So I think it is reviewing those changes. As it relates to the police chief, I know he is working his hardest right now to try to resolve our violent crime issues. And so I think what we need to do is provide some level of guidance, some level of direction. And that's what I fully intend to do as a board member. But the other thing we all need to say is that this is not something we can get used to. And I say it again, and it sounds superficial, but then every year we get used to it. Right? I was born in Kansas City. I lived here when we broke our last homicide record. I was a child then. Right? And then we all kind of move on to something different. Bartle Hall expansion, who knows what under the sun. We need to say that our city will not be as strong as it possibly can be, and indeed our region won't be until we address our violent crime issue.
You're referring to 1993, Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you spoken to Representative Cleaver? He was mayor back then. Are there similarities to the problems we're seeing now? Like, why are we seeing this surge now?
That's a very good question, and I will note that although I talk to Representative Cleaver often, I do not actually talk to him enough probably about what happened when he was then Mayor of Cleaver, why we saw that surge then. I know many people on the department, some still are around from back then. The theory of the time was that it was drugs and gang activity and that sort of thing that led to our homicide increase, and then there was just a subsequent decrease that was tracked around the country. It seems as if right now you would say it's really not the same level of gangland activity that we saw of yesteryear. Certainly they're still around. Certainly there is a lot of activity and drugs and people getting held up and that sort of thing. But there's something new. There's something less organized than what we saw from the Bloods and the Crips of the early 1990s. And frankly, it's a bit terrifying because we are getting a lot of incidents that at least speak to, while not entirely random, they speak to kind of this lack of control. You don't have that same kind of organized crime level of organization that you might have had 27 years ago. And I think that means that finding solutions has been even more challenging.
Have you been hearing the weight of the pandemic and the angst from the last several weeks of protests are adding or exacerbating that?
I think there is a theory of the case from some that our protest movement and the pandemic have added to some of the concerns. I would say first on the protests, I do not think they're related. I believe that we are a city and we're a country that can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can have a conversation on criminal justice, and indeed we need to, while also noting that murdering people is wholly inappropriate and something that we all need to stop. A story out of Atlanta I read this morning and shared on social media relates to the fact that, an 8-year-old girl was struck and killed by a bullet recently. And her parents were folks that were kind of involved in saying we need police reform, right? You can do both, and we need to figure out a way to have that. And so I don't necessarily relate the two, even though I have heard some of the voices that say, well, there's generalized lawlessness. I don't think so. I talk to a lot of the protesters. Most of them are folks that are saying we want to see better accountability, frankly, not just from the police department, but from the mayor's office, the courts, et cetera. And so that's one side. On the pandemic issue, I do think that there has been a challenge with our ability to be able to kind of have some of those programs that kept people engaged, that kept young people engaged, that allowed us to actually reach more of the community. We're not doing that now necessarily. And I think that does create a challenge for us, very, very realistically. But, this is the problem you're seeing in almost every American city of some size. Frankly, you saw a homicide in Olathe for the first time in some time. Kansas City, Kansas is dealing with the issue, so it's a broad regional one. And we can't use the pandemic as an excuse. We just need to find better ways to reach people.
Mayor Lucas, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.